And the arrest of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange is making all the headlines today. Just take a look at this. Look at those headlines. Why Britain is likely to send WikiLeaks Assange to Sweden on rape charges. Arrested WikiLeaks chief denied bail in the UK. And Julian Assange's new image just in time to talk about those rape accusations. But could there be more to the story? What's behind the media frenzy? And who is behind the accusations? Well, investigative journalist and RT contributor Wayne Matson is here for more. All right, Wayne, so he faces allegations of rape, of molestation, of unlawful coercion. There are two women accusing him of all of this. What do we know about them? Well, one in particular seems to have a pretty jaded background. Anna Arden, who was with an anti-Castro group. Now, where have we heard all this before? I've said that I think Julian Assange, who came out of the hacker community, is probably useful to somebody, but he may have outlived his usefulness, like another patsy once outlived his usefulness, who was associated with an anti-Castro organization, Lee Harvey Oswald. So what do we have here? A guy who served his purpose. Now we have legislation in Congress to put the Patriot Act into the Internet realm. What we know about Anna Arden, though, she was with a group called Ladies in White and associated with a guy named Kyrillos Posada, or Posada Kyrillos. He is a very nasty terrorist. He was responsible for bombing a Cubana Airlines plane in 1976 that took off from Barbados. Now, if Assange claims he has all this knowledge about what's going on and he didn't know who he was associating with in Sweden, well, I think this goes to show that he just wasn't very careful. But the saga continues, of course, with Mr. Assange. Well, he's calling this a smear campaign. His lawyers are calling this a smear campaign. But it's very interesting because officials here in the United States have been pretty blunt when it comes to talking about both Assange and the situation. I want to play you a few clips. Take a listen to this.
Well, I think Assange should be assassinated, actually. I think Obama should put out a contract and maybe use a drone or something.
Whoever in our government leaked that information is guilty of treason. And I think anything less than execution is too kind a penalty.
He is an enemy of the United States, actively endangering people, and he's going to get a lot of folks killed. And I think that's a despicable act, and we should treat him as an enemy combatant and as an absolute enemy of the United States.
Also worth mentioning, other members of Congress calling on Secretary of State to label WikiLeaks as a foreign terrorist organization. So pretty strong language here coming from some of those talking heads and officials. Yeah, I would note that two of those, Gingrich and Huckabee, are also possible presidential candidates. So just like any carnival barker, they want to, get their 2 cents in. But what they said shows they may have 2 cents, but they don't have any common sense. To say, we just go around and assassinate somebody and declare some group a foreign terrorist organization. I mean, it's so common to hear this rhetoric out of U.S. government people these days. But I would stress the fact that I think what we have with Assange is somebody who got involved with computer hacking early on in Australia, may have worked with some groups like the Chaos Computer Club out of Hamburg, and may have been co-opted by the intelligence agencies. Now, he's a guest of Scotland Yard, presumably, and he's probably being visited by certain people at the U.S. Embassy in London who probably have a lot of curiosity about some of what he's been involved with. I would almost guarantee he's being visited by some Americans, courtesy of our British cousins. So, I mean, but with all these charges, and he's saying that he's going to fight the extradition, but is this it for him? Well, we have to see, how good his lawyers are. I would note that they've frozen his bank account in Switzerland. If his money's cut off, he'll find out that his legal representation is probably going to be pretty non-existent because lawyers work for money, as we know. Well, James Catlin had been representing him, and he's the one that actually came out and said that those two women were sort of sending text messages after their experience with Julian Assange, sort of boasting about that. So he has representation now.
Yes. Well, we'll see how long that continues if he, he winds up being penniless. And I think the problem here, though, with Assange is he got involved in something that was way beyond him. He probably didn't understand what he was involved with. He was obviously carrying water for certain special interests, because as I note, as I noted, Israel looked good in the initial release of the State Department cable tranche, and now we have the move in Congress to put in a shield law to make it illegal to expose any CIA informants around the world. That's what we're faced with now, the movement of the national security state as we've never seen it before into cyberspace.
You know, it's interesting. Just last week, a lot of New York Times readers sent notes to the editor, and they had a whole sort of series that they released of this Q&A between the readers and the editors. And a lot of the readers were saying, we're disgusted that you even released this. The fact that we're going to stop our subscriptions, sort of trying to hold the New York Times accountable. So we don't really see that anywhere. I just wanted to get your opinion on that, because that's something that a lot of people bring up. They say, okay, Assange is one thing, but what about the media outlets that also, in effect, release this stuff?
Well, two things in particular. We saw some of these cables come out with redactions. I think we saw it with The Guardian. So some names...
Right, I mean, they went to the government beforehand.
Exactly.
But Assange had, had a communication with the State Department as well.
Right. So we've seen some manipulation of these documents. It wasn't like, we're going to just throw this out there. And, so there was an amount of gatekeeping. We also have some cables that have shown up on Al Akbar, Lebanese newspaper's website, that apparently they're saying never came from WikiLeaks. So there may be another source for these State Department cables we don't know about, which tends to make the charges against Private First Class Bradley Manning somewhat spurious, because how did the Lebanese paper get these documents if they didn't come from WikiLeaks?
Well, certainly an interesting story, and I think you called it best a saga there. RT contributor and investigative journalist Wayne Madsen.